University of MacroPro, our summer school series of webinars. I'm Diane Cohen, Vice President of Client Relations and the Dean of Education. It's my pleasure to bring to you these programs and our excellent speakers like Dr. Herrera, who'll be speaking to us in just a few minutes. So today our topic is on psych depositions as leverage to settle. And this is really an important conversation because, as you know, psych claims can be very, very complicated. They could be emotional, they could be heavily disputed, and they can be the reason we can't close a claim. But doctor's going to show us what we can do to help prevent that. So today we are going to look on how psych depositions can do more than just give you checkbox to check off. They can help you with clarifying issues, making better evaluations, and to move the file forward towards settlement. And that is doctor's goal. Isn't that right, doctor? You're going to make that as a goal today to help us settle those claims?
Sure is.
Okay, well,
Yes.
good to know. So we are fortunate to have Dr. Herrera with us today. He's been with us on other webinars and in our Macro Pro and Friends conferences. He's always a crowd favorite. So we really appreciate you being here today with us, Doctor. Now, we know you are a brilliant doctor. That undisputed, but you're also a family man. So maybe you could share with our attendees today what exciting things are happening, because I know they can relate with you.
Yes. Well, just like us all on the call, uh, it's important to juggle work life and family life and find balance. Some of the family life excitement for me personally, and I'm sure many of you on the call, are graduations, right? This is graduation season, and I have two children who are no longer kids, teen or young adults, and they both graduated last week. One from high school who's going to head to Pepperdine University, and I also have a son who graduated from community college. His passion is baseball, and so he committed to play baseball in Northridge, and he'll be transferring there in August.
Well, that's so exciting. Congratulations. You know, we all love to see our children flourish and do great things. So maybe I always like to ask our audience a question that they can put like in the question box. So when I do the housekeeping stuff, maybe you guys can put into the chat box if you guys have a graduate this year, whether it's college or kindergarten. You know, there's a lot of different graduations. So please let us know so we can see that and see what's going on in your life. So before I turn this over to you, Doctor, I have a few things I'd like to say. That today's webinar is worth one California CEU credit. You need to be sure to log on with the link that GoToWebinar sent, and GoToWebinar is going to keep time and attendance. And you need to make sure that you're on for 50 minutes in order to get that certificate. So please don't log on quickly or log off quickly. If you have a problem and you have to log off and you log back on, GoToWebinar sees that and they will still give you your credits. So you don't need to worry about that if you have some type of technical difficulties. There are handouts for today's presentation. I will make sure that they are attached to the webinar and you should be able to download those. If not, then I'll be sure to send it to you and you can email me at Diane, D-I-A-N-N, at macropro.com. And then lastly, if you have any questions, then you can go ahead and put those questions in the comment box and I will, or question box, and I will read those to Doctor when the opportunity rises. If not, we'll be catching them at the very end. And as always, you can watch an encore performance of Doctor and his brilliance at the Macro Pro YouTube channel. So Doctor, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to all who are logged in and attending and ready to experience a discussion that I hope will be very fruitful and full of good suggestions and information about psych depositions as leverage to settle the psych claims. My name is Dr. Ron Heredia, and I'll introduce myself just a little bit further in a few slides. I'll also have a goal for today's discussion to provide you all with information about what should be in psych reports, what is the information, and then as you're reading those psych reports on psych claims, being able to identify some of the red flags in those reports and understand what can be done about the red flags or the common problems that are found in psych evaluation, psych treatment, and the reports that we get from doctors. Um, I'll discuss exposing some of those major flaws in the reports on the record or asking for a supplemental report. Ultimately, using the discovery from the psych doctors as leverage to settle the claim. Now, who am I and what do I do and why am I here discussing psych claims for you all? I'm, again, Dr. Ron Heredia. I'm the director of Good Mood Legal. We are a psychology consulting practice where we have a team of psychologists who do the AME, QME, and treatment work. But we also provide a service that really nobody else provides, as far as I understand, and that is reviewing and critiquing psych reports for you all, helping you all to understand the psych reports that you get from psych doctors, and writing up questions to use to depose those doctors or request supplemental reports, and using this information as leverage to settle the claims. In addition, I teach psychology at the community college level. I teach a variety of courses. And I'll say that a parallel that I have found between my work teaching students and my work teaching you all and people in the work comp space, the parallel being psychological testing. We have to teach that at college level, and my students usually know nothing about psychological testing and have lots of questions. And of course, psychological is definitely a part of psychological and psychiatric evaluations in work comp and reports, right? We have to have the testing information in the reports and be able to understand what the doctor is saying about the psychological testing and why it is so important. So I'll share some of that information with you all here today. I like to begin the discussion with a figure model that I created called the Psych Diagnosis Vulnerability Model. Now, I call this the vulnerability model because, in my opinion, the psychological diagnosis given by the doctor, major depression, generalized anxiety, adjustment disorder, whatever the psychological diagnosis is, my opinion is that that is the most vulnerable area or piece of the doctor's report. So when the doctor's report just doesn't sit well, you have a strong feeling something is just not right here with what the doctor is saying, focus in, laser in on their diagnosis. That is the most vulnerable area of their report. So if you're ever of the mindset to take the approach of challenging the doctor's report and opinions, the psychological diagnosis is the area. It's important to me that the colleagues in my field of study, psychology, psychiatry, that they get it right. And often in work comp, what I have found over the 26 years that I've worked in this space is that there are a lot of by psych doctors, unfortunately, and that doesn't do justice or doesn't do good for the injured workers. It doesn't do any good for the claims folks, for the attorneys on the case who have to work and understand the complexities of psychology and psychiatry. And for the injured worker especially, it's important that they get the appropriate treatment if they need treatment at all on an industrial basis. And so what is the appropriate treatment? Definitely, if they have an incorrect diagnosis, they're not likely to get the treatment that's right for them. So it's important that we get the doctors to give diagnoses that are supported, that are substantiated, and that we challenge the psych reports when there's a feeling that it just doesn't sit right, something's wrong. So I created this model. We have the report in the bottom, the triangle, psych diagnosis resting on that report, and it looks like it could teeter either way. A deposition is taken, or the right questions, I say the right in air quotes because attorneys need to know what questions to ask at deposition in order to or correct the diagnosis. And so that diagnosis may fall as being unsupported. It may teeter either way. It'll take causation, GAF, apportionment, disability, and treatment. So those areas will fall by the wayside. Don't really have to worry about those anymore if the diagnosis is not supported. So it's important we have a correct and diagnosis in the report. I created another figure model. These are the areas on the timeline of a psychology or psychiatry where psych advocacy letters sent to the psych doctors can be useful, and with an X. We have a claim filed to start. There may be treatment right away. Send the doctor a letter. Send the doctor an advocacy letter. However, it's important to have a carefully crafted letter that tells the doctor some of the specifics of the case, and more importantly, gives them the expectations for their work. Tell them how to do their job, so to speak. Include things like, please give psychological test, give the MMPI, put the MMPI scores in the report. Those are important. Take a complete history from the patient. Include information about the frequency, intensity, duration, onset, and course over time of each symptom. That would make the doctor's report complete, not just summary notes. Another area, a mental status examination. For example, please, you can tell the doctor in a letter, please conduct a thorough mental status examination, provide your observations of the patient's behavior in the areas of mood, memory, concentration, insight, and judgment. It's important the doctors know that you all are aware of these things, that they need to be done properly and correctly. And if they're not aware, they may just provide a report that is more surface or summary in nature. And each of the X's are the areas where an advocacy letter that is carefully crafted has an opportunity to be submitted to those doctors. And I'm happy to discuss this further with you all if you ever have questions or need clarity to discuss how this can be useful to leverage settlement, get correct diagnoses from the doctor, or otherwise ask the doctor some questions to get them to provide further discovery in the claims for psychology and psychiatry. Well, this slide has an opportunity for you all to participate, so I hope you will. And this can be done by scanning the QR code there on the screen with your device. I'll allow a few seconds for that to happen. And what should happen is your device will populate with the question that you can answer very quickly and easily, and your responses will come up on the screen here in real time. The question is, what are the reasons being identified as the cause of psych claims that you all are seeing? What are the reasons? What I can tell you, some of the major reasons that I often am told when I go out and have interactions and connections with claims folks and attorneys are things like stress, harassment. Yes, stress being, it's big in the screen here because that means most or many of you are typing stress, and then some of you are typing out harassment, adjustment, violence, hostility. Thank you for participating. Keep them coming. This gives us a good understanding of all of us on the call or on the video here and what we are seeing as the reasons folks are filing psych claims, right? Stress seems to be the big one, and harassment. So that's good information for me because now I can kind of develop our discussion today along the lines of stress, harassment, personnel actions, violence, anxiety, which can be coupled and often mistaken for stress. So thank you for participating. There'll be some more questions coming up in the slides, so keep your device handy, and I appreciate that. Why settle? So big question is, why settle the claim? Well, I'm told by folks in our industry that some of the reasons for challenging the doctor or getting them, asking them a position or asking them questions to produce a supplemental report, some of the reasons are, I want to get the doctor to change their opinions. I usually say, good, that's a valid reason. There's also the flip side to that, which is doctors have egos, right? We all have egos. And when a doctor writes a report, they feel like they did a job, a good job, or a thorough job that they should be paid for. Are they likely to change their opinions? In my experience, the answer is usually no. Usually the doctor will answer questions, they'll submit more reports, they'll do reevaluations, they'll succumb to depositions. They're not likely to change their opinions. Another option, get the doctor's report dismissed by the judge. Attorneys can do that, right? Great if that makes sense for your case. However, the flip side of that, I'm often told that if that is the route and that is successful, it could become costly for the claims side, right? Because then you have to start all over with a new AME or QME, or perhaps rely on the treating doctor's reporting, which may also be substantially problematic. So there's a third option that I've identified and I think makes sense for claims, typically, not always, but typically, and that is negotiate a favorable settlement to your side. How can we negotiate favorable settlements, possibly save a lot of money on claims, especially the high exposure claims? I think it is challenging the doctor's report by taking their deposition and asking these hard-hitting questions, focused in, like laser pointed in on the diagnosis only. Discredit the diagnosis through deposition, then GAF, apportionment, treatment, disability, and causation opinions will fall by the wayside. Potentially, um, and once that is exposed on the record during deposition, the opposing attorney sitting there listening in and taking it all in will likely have a clear understanding of, well, we're not going to get very far here with this doctor's report. So maybe we should take what we get in settlement. At that point, bring the settlement demand down much lower for, or what makes sense for your side of the case. And hopefully the outcomes will be successful for your side of the case, favorable, right? So ways to settle: elevate, offer a high dollar amount attractive to the applicant. Okay, that's one way. Meet in the middle, applicant wins, maybe, right? Because perhaps they don't even have a psychological diagnosis, maybe symptoms, right? We all struggle. That's valid too, but perhaps there's not a level or a threshold to reach a psychological diagnosis from the DSM. Perhaps it's not industrially caused, but the doctor says leans that way. So instead, maybe consider empower. Empower your attorney to expose the doctor's major diagnostic and methodological flaws in front of the opposing attorney and negotiate a more favorable settlement to your side that way, by empowering the folks who are working on these claims in the industry, in the work comp space, right? So this brings us to another question. What psychological diagnosis do you see doctors give most often in the psych reports and the psych claims that you all handle? Major depressive disorder, that's first and foremost that I see. Okay, here we come. Here comes the responses in real time. Thank you all for participating. I do need to scroll to see what's happening with the percentages. Post-traumatic stress. All right. So I'll share with you, thank you. Keep the responses coming in. I'll share with you that, again, I've been working in the psychology space of workers' comp in California for 26 years. And I've read psych reports written by other psych doctors almost daily in 26 years. And historically, I've seen major depressive disorder be the #1 diagnosed disorder in work comp community. That is changing a bit, especially, and I think you all are seeing it too, I can tell, because PTSD is on the rise for sure. I see that a lot more in psych reports, especially post-COVID, right? And with the onset of the PTSD presumption laws. So we have a tie, major depression, PTSD, and then there's adjustment disorders for sure. Most recently, I'll also tell you, which is very strange to me. I've seen two psychology reports that I've been asked to critique and help the attorney depose the psych doctor on. Two in the last month, where the doctor gave an adjustment disorder along with a post-traumatic stress disorder. And what most folks don't know is that is a big no-no according to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The DSM manual say adjustment disorder should not be given with the PTSD. So why in the world is the doctor doing that in the two reports that I've seen in the last month? Which means there are many more reports out there that are where the doctors are doing that same thing. And the only answer I can come up with is the doctors are just maybe not keeping up with the literature. They don't read the DSM. They're just assigning disorders based on their gut feeling, right? And that should never happen in psychology or psychiatry. Gut feelings should never happen. We are not psychics in this space or community. We are scientists, really, fields of study in psychology and psychiatry. So it should all be based on literature, research, and collecting enough data or evidence to know what disorder fits. What is the proper disorder? So thank you all for participating. We do have a tie. We'll end there on major depression and post-traumatic stress. And we're seeing, as the previous survey showed, lots of stress and harassment claims being filed, where the doctors are giving major depression and post-traumatic stress disorders. So it's important that I share with you all my stance, right? If I was a psychologist or a psychiatrist writing PQME reports that are problematic, I was on your side, I would want to focus on the report as opposed to focusing my challenge or my next steps in the case on the patient, right? Focus on the report, not the patient. And I'll explain, I'll elaborate. The doctor's report that they submit to you all is the evidence. This is their evidence they're submitting to the court, to the work comp community. The doctor's report is the doctor's work product. They are getting paid for their report. In fact, the medical legal fee schedule, it gives codes and dollar amounts for the report. It doesn't say anything about payment being submitted for the number of hours face-to-face interview. It doesn't give anything, any information about what should be paid for the doctor's research, for the doctor's education or degree. It's only on their report. And of course, you have to pay, I believe it's $3 an hour for record review, anything beyond 200 pages, right? So the doctor's review of records and their report is what's paid for. That's their work product. The doctor's report is what's paid for ultimately. And so it seems to fit that if an attorney or an insurance professional is to question the doctor, either asking for a supplemental report or taking their deposition, is ask questions directed only at the doctor's report. And those questions can sound like this. Doctor, please explain or please tell us where in your report you provided sufficient evidence to meet the criteria in the DSM for a post-traumatic stress disorder. Criterion are A through H in the DSM. They each say that the person has to meet specific things, A through H. So the doctor should be able to say, oh, on this page in my report, I provided support for criterion A. This page, criteria B. This page, criteria C. And go down the line all the way A through H. Unfortunately, 26 years reading psych reports, that almost is never a possibility. The doctors do not provide evidence or support for the diagnosis they give, unfortunately, right? Another question could be, Dr. Ware, you said that the patient complained about being depressed. Where in your report Did you discuss the frequency of their depression or how often they feel depressed? What if the doctor doesn't put that in their report? What are they going to say? Uh-oh, I can't tell you where it is in my report. And then follow it up with, where in your report did you discuss the duration of their depression or how often they feel depressed when they have that feeling? Uh-oh, I didn't put that in my report either. Well, I'll share with you all, for those that see a major depressive disorder given by the doctors in their reports, the number one criteria in the DSM for a major depressive disorder, it says in black and white, the person needs to have depressed mood most of the day. Most of the day, that's duration. Nearly every day, that's frequency. We need to know that information in the report, and if the doctors don't put it, then that just means their report does not constitute substantial medical evidence for the diagnosis they gave. It's important to ask the questions and focus on the report. Your attorneys are the ones that can ask questions in a deposition. Empower them. Allow them to, maybe, if it makes sense for your case, consult with psych professionals and ask for a complete script of questions to ask the doctor. Ask for help with drafting a carefully crafted advocacy letter. Ask for help understanding all of the doctor's 80-page report or however long it is, right? And ask for help with understanding so that they can ultimately get settlement authority and negotiate a more favorable settlement to your side of the case. That could make sense, especially for the high exposure psych claims. Every report, every psych report must have a psychological disorder. That's what the labor code says. In order for there to be a compensable psychiatric injury, the report must contain a psychological disorder given to the injured worker. Have any of you ever seen a psych report in work comp where it says no disorder, nothing's wrong with the person? Now, a few of you might be nodding your heads or raising your hand. It can happen, right? However, I think, in again, 26 years reading psych reports, it's a very rare occasion. So then what? Then it's important that you all have access to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. In fact, I have one on my desk here. I'm going to show you. This is the DSM-5. It's pretty thick. Nobody wants to read all of these 900 pages. Psych doctors should, for sure, read those and understand it. And it's important that you all have access to one of these manuals so you can flip to the page for PTSD or flip to the page for major depressive disorder and see all of the requirements that the person must meet to have that disorder given to them correctly. And then it becomes a matching game. This is what I do. You could do the same thing. Put the DSM on your desk side by side with the report and find where in the report does the doctor say and explain that the person met criteria 1, criteria 2, all, or A, B, C, all the way down for that disorder that they gave. And guess what? Almost always you're going to find there's no support in this report. There's no support for the diagnosis. That means the report does not constitute substantial medical evidence if that's what you find. On a very rare occasion, you'll find this report's pretty good. I can find all of the data and the evidence. Perfect. Now you know that's probably the correct diagnosis that the doctor gave. And the treatment that follows is probably good for the injured worker. Unfortunately, like I said, it's a very rare occasion. So then send the attorney in, question the doctor. On the non-litigated cases, submit that supplemental request with the hard-hitting questions that the doctor is being asked to respond to in a supplemental report. Now, in every psych report, because the report's so important, right? Every psych report needs to have, well, it needs to have the top 3 on this list, the top 3 areas, and it can possibly have the next 2, numbers 4 and 5. Every psych report needs to have a discussion of the patient's life history and their presenting complaints or symptoms. Complaint, symptoms, those are synonyms. Every psych report needs to have a discussion and a section dedicated to the doctor's mental status examination. Every psych report needs to have psychological testing and the interpretation of those test scores and the test scores themselves put into the report. Then, if the doctor receives medical records from you folks, the doctor's review of those records should be in the report. And lastly, if the patient cannot speak or think for themselves, perhaps a victim of a stroke, a traumatic brain injury, a paranoia, or hallucinating where they can't verbally speak or think or articulate for themselves, or perhaps they're deceased and with an ongoing claim, then it's important that the doctor collects collateral sources of information. That is when they have to interview the patient's family, friends, and coworkers. Now I'm going to discuss or elaborate on areas numbers 1 through 3 a little bit further, but I do see a question and I'm going to read it out loud in the chat. Doctor, why is it that AME, QME comment, that's great, that the employees are able to do certain activities after review of active surveillance videos? Rarely do medical doctors side with us on surveillance findings. Okay. Oh, and I saw that Diane said she'll ask it later, but I'll respond to that now, because it is in the area and it fits here, area number 4, the review and the discussion of the patient's medical records. Often surveillance videos, sub-rosa videos given to the doctors and asked to review. And for somebody who maybe had a physical injury and is complaining, one of the major complaints, let's say, is chronic pain, back pain, neck pain, and you have surveillance video of them picking up children or moving trash cans or jogging a mile, okay, I get it. And then you read the psych report and the doctor says, they're completely honest. I find no credibility issues, and they have a pain disorder or they have a somatic symptom disorder because of the back and the neck issues. Well, first, I'll say that surveillance video could be helpful. Although, in my opinion, for psychology and psychiatry, the helpfulness scale is minimal. The surveillance video can be helpful to psychologists and psychiatrists by raising issues about credibility, right? If the injured worker tells the doctor, I can't lift, I can't run, and I can't drive, and you have surveillance video of them doing those things, credibility issues, for sure, that the doctor should address and pick up on. For the rest of the surveillance, I'll say it's minimal because, in my understanding, my opinion, is that through a video lens, sometimes not knowing when the video was taken in relevance to the actual PQME evaluation, the doctor it's going to be very challenging for the doctor to, through a video, determine if the person is experiencing or meeting the criteria for a disorder, right? So if they have a disorder, you really can't tell that through a video. If they have symptoms, well, depression, sadness, anxiety, those are real symptoms that might prevent somebody from getting outdoors, running a mile. However, it's not consistent. Doesn't need to be 24 hours a day every day. Folks can be depressed and anxious, but also have moments in their life of happiness and activity, physical activity, or getting outside and getting outdoors, right? And that's what they're supposed to do. Us as humans, when we do have those moments of anxiousness or depression, we should be trying to get better, right? Our human nature will tell us we don't want these feelings. We want to feel balanced or equilibrium. And what's going to allow us to do that? Well, let me try getting outside. Let me try doing some of the normal things in my life that I've been doing. And so in those moments, if you're capturing them on video surveillance, that might be a glimpse into them trying to get better. So I hope that helps explain, and I can elaborate further, for sure, in a different discussion if you have more questions. and I'll move on. I wanted to explain a little bit about numbers 1 and 2, especially patient's life history and their presenting symptoms or complaints. When you find that section of a doctor's report, what should you look for? Well, you should look for a complete history. So you're going to find a section where the doctor discusses the patient's symptoms or complaints on the day of the exam. The doctors might say, the patient said that they're depressed, they're sad, they have pain, they have sleep problems, and they have concentration issues. Okay, fine, that's the symptoms. That's not a complete qualitative description of their symptoms. What the doctors must or should be adding is the information about frequency, intensity, duration, onset, and course over time of each symptom. I'll give you an example. Let's just take depression. Person complained about being depressed. Fine. What we need more information. We need to know the frequency. How often do they feel depressed? Person, if asked, could say, I'm depressed every day. Or a person, if asked, could say, I'm depressed about 2 or 3 days out of a month. That's a huge difference. We need to know the frequency, and the doctors need to put it in their report. Unfortunately, it's a rare occasion that you'll find that information. Intensity. On a scale of 1 to 10, the doctor could ask, patient, tell me how you rate the intensity of your depression. And the patient could say an 11. The patient could say, oh, I'd say it's about a 2 or a 3. Big difference. We need to know. The doctor needs to put it in their report. We're rarely going to find that, unfortunately. D, the next one is for duration. You said you're depressed. When you feel depressed, how long does it last? What's the duration? Patient could say 24 hours, doctor. Or the patient could say about 2 to 3 hours in the morning when I wake up. Big difference. We need to know that information in the report. Doctors don't put it for some strange reason. I don't know why. Even worse, if the doctor gave a major depressive disorder, like I said earlier, the number one requirement is they have a depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. 2 to 3 hours in the morning, is that most of the day? I don't think so. 4 or 5 days out of a month, is that nearly every day? I wouldn't say so. So we need to know the information. Frequency, intensity, duration. The next one is O for onset. When is the very first time you felt this level of depression? What's the onset? The person might say, when I was 8 years old, I had a very bad death in the family, somebody close to me. The person might say 2 days after the work injury, or the person might say 2 months ago, my best friend passed away from a horrible accident, onset of depression. We need to know the information, right? Two of those responses would mean not industrial, or maybe aggravated or exacerbated by something industrial. But regardless, we have to know the information. And then the last piece is course over time. We need to know the course over time of each symptom. The doctor can ask, you said you're depressed, and you said it started 2 years ago. In the last 2 years, has your depression gradually gotten worse? Has it gradually gotten better? What is the course your depression has taken over time? Did it go away and then come back? We need to know the information. Doctors don't put it in their reports. They should be questioned about it in deposition so that we know the doctor is giving the correct diagnosis and therefore the patient's getting the appropriate treatment. If not, we just don't know. Next, the number 2, mental status examination. A mental status examination is about a 15 to 30-minute portion of every psychological or psychiatric evaluation. Every psych doctor knows and is trained on how to conduct a mental status examination in those 15 to 30 minutes. And every psych doctor knows and is trained why this is so important. Why is it important? Well, the psychological literature all of the professional research says that when a doctor observes in 15 to 30-minute portion, they can observe a patient's behaviors in the areas of mood, memory, concentration, insight, and judgment. And if the doctor observes significant abnormalities in most of those 5 areas, that likely means the person is suffering from emotional problems. So now we know the doctors need to observe the patient's behaviors because it could provide data or support for their diagnosis. And when you read these sections of the reports, a mental status exam section of a report, the doctor's description needs to say what they observed. Unfortunately, doctors don't put their observations in. They simply like to say things like, memory was intact, concentration was fair, insight and judgment were adequate, mood was depressed. Those are what I call summary conclusions. They don't give us any information about what the doctor observed. The doctor can observe things like a depressed person, disheveled appearance, no eye contact, tears in their eyes, stuttering, standing up and sitting down often, wringing their hands, somber look, whatever it may be. Those would be descriptions of observations. Memory, can a doctor observe a person's memory? Everybody say yes. Yes, they can, right? And this is how the doctor can quickly observe a person's memory by saying, repeat these numbers for me, 1, 7, 19, 20. And if the person says them back out loud in the correct order, that might be an indication that they have good short-term memory function. The doctor might ask, what is the name of your first grade teacher? What is the name of the street that you grew up on as a child? What is your driver's license or California ID number? Those are also quick assessments of memory. If the person struggles, the doctor should say, the applicant was unable to recall the name of their first grade teacher. With a brief delay, they were able to recall the name of their first grade or their street that they grew up on as a child. Whatever the observation is, the doctor needs to provide that. And then psychological testing, the doctors need to give tests. But the number one test, if they don't give any others, it should be the MMPI. Why? Because the MMPI is the number one gold standard test of all psychological test batteries for medical legal purposes, because the MMPI can assess a person's credibility. It can tell if they are being honest and truthful, or if they are exaggerating or faking symptoms. And then if it does detect a person is honest and truthful, the MMPI can assess psychopathology. The MMPI can tell, does the patient have depression? If the patient has anxiety, is hallucinating, has schizophrenia, is extreme stress, anything of those natures, trauma, the MMPI will detect. So these 5 sources of information, these 5 areas of a psych report are so important. And we need to have the information in these 5 sections so that we can do that matching game. Put the DSM side by side with the report and find the areas to match the information. Hypothetical situation here. We have a report, let's say, right? The diagnosis, we flip to the back. That's what I do first. I feel like you all probably do the same. Flip to the back, find what is the diagnosis? We find a major depressive disorder. And then we go on to read further and we find the doctor said their major depressive disorder is industrial in nature, that there is no apportionment to non-industrial factors. The person was temporarily totally disabled for 1 year period, that there's a GAF score of 55, and that the person needs 6 months of psychotherapy and psychiatric medication. Okay, that's real life scenario. I see reports like that all the time. Then you can go through the report and you can find the life history section. Look for FIDO-C, frequency, intensity, duration, onset, course over time, to meet a major depressive disorder. The big question you want to ask is there sufficient information in this section of the doctor's report to satisfy the DSM requirements for a major depression. You'll check if the doctor doesn't put that information, no information in that section of the report to support PTSD, especially depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Next, you'll transfer to the mental status exam section. Are there enough observations described by the doctor to support clinical depression, to support that the person was having concentration or memory problems? Usually, the answer is going to be no. Check. No information in the mental status exam section. Did the doctor give an MMPI? Did the scores show they were honest and truthful? If not, check. There's not enough information in psychological testing to support a major depression. Then what do we have? We have a report that doesn't support the diagnosis the doctor gave. Another example here is a doctor gives psychological factors affecting medical condition as their diagnosis, and they said they use the DSM-4TR. Top secret information I'll share with you all. The DSM-4TR does not have this disorder in it. It lists this disorder, or this condition, I should say, in the back of the book under an area that it calls conditions for future consideration. All too often, I see doctors give this disorder, and they say that they use the DSM-4TR, and they say it's industrial. Well, this is not a disorder. So it's important for you all to be able to look this up in the DSM and determine this is not an actual psychological disorder. And without a disorder, there can be no compensable psychiatric injury. So what are we treating if the doctor doesn't, or if the patient doesn't have an actual DSM disorder? Okay, so I'm going to, in the interest of time and leaving some valuable time for questions to be answered, I will make sure that I cover the next participation question here. And that question is, what psychological tests do you see discussed in psych reports? Now, we talked a lot about tests, talked a lot about how the MMPI is so important. What are the tests that you all see in the reports that you get? Now, this is not a comprehensive list, right? These are just a few tests that I see sometimes, but I will say there are many more psychological tests that are often given in psych reports. These are some of the most common that I see. Thank you for participating. So you see the MMPI, which is good. One of the things that I've been noticing on MMPI in psych reports that I read and critique are that the doctors are not putting the scores in the report. For some strange reason, they need to put those scores in the report because the scores are telling. Look at the L scale, the F as in Frank scale, and the K scale. First and foremost, if the doctor gives the MMPI 2 or the MMPI 2RF, you're going to look to see L, F, K. Are those scores 65 or higher? If yes, to any of those scores, that means the person was attempting to simulate their symptoms, and the #1 gold standard test detected that. Then read further. Did the doctor say anything about it? And did they say why they or how they considered that exaggerating or attempting to simulate symptoms, or otherwise a synonym, faking symptoms? Did they consider that in saying that the person had a major depressive disorder? Look for that in the report. Epworth Sleepiness Scale, Beck's, yes. So I'll say about the Waller, the Beck's, and the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, those tests do not have validity scales. Why is that important? Because those tests without validity scales cannot assess a person's credibility. They have no way of determining if the person was answering honestly and truthfully or not. Thank you all for participating on that one. I'll add to our discussion about psychological tests. Not only does every credible psych report need the psychological testing discussion, the tests need to be given by the doctor, and they need to be, especially the MMPI, never given at home. Never allow the patient to take that test at home. In fact, the MMPI-2 manual and the MMPI-3 manual state very specifically in multiple areas of the manual, they tell the doctor, do not allow this test to be taken at home. Do not give this test to be taken at home for a variety of reasons. The test needs to be given under supervised conditions. This test needs to be given with adequate lighting and ventilation, is what the manual says. And if the test is given at home, how is the doctor ensuring that there is adequate lighting and ventilation, that there is supervision of the person taking the test? You just can't. So that test should never be taken at home. And if you find that it is, the doctor has violated the instructions on how to give the MMPI. And if they say they relied on the MMPI results, there are big problems for their report. Another question that can possibly be used in a supplemental request or at deposition is, doctor, did you review any records from a credible mental health practitioner who concurred with your diagnosis, who gave the same diagnosis as you? And if no, if the answer is no, that means the doctor's review of records section has no support for their diagnosis. We talked about carefully crafted advocacy letters and the different points throughout a claim that these letters can be helpful, can possibly force the doctor to provide a complete qualitative history and answer questions about frequency, intensity, duration, onset, course over time of each symptom. Last question of our time together for your participation. Which one do you want to know more about? MMPI, frequency, intensity, duration, course over time, onset, MCMI test, which is the Milan Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory, history, mental status exam, testing, records, collateral sources. MMPI, I think that's a strong winner. Well, thank you all for participating in that. And I'll share, since you want to know about the MMPI, that the MMPI can, again, most #1 gold standard test, can detect credibility, faking lying, honest and truthfulness. There is an MMPI-3. It was published in December of 2020. I reviewed a report last week. The doctor gave an MMPI-2 short form, which is a big no-no. It just means they're basically trying to cut corners and not spend so much time on testing. The short form is only half of the test. The MMPI-2 is 567 questions. It's true-false. The questions are relatively short. They're about 3 to 5 words, so it can go quickly or relatively quickly. And the person marks true or false on the answer sheet. That answer sheet is then scored, and it spits out numbers on various scales. L, F, K scales are the big 3 for validity. First and foremost, the doctor needs to determine, does the MMPI show that the person is being honest and truthful, that they're credible? And if not, the doctor can say nothing further about the results of that test. They often ignore that, and they do. I see a lot of psych doctors send the MMPI to be scored by Pearson Assessments, which is a company that published the MMPI. And what Pearson Assessments does is it will score the MMPI. It will send the doctor back, as long as the doctor pays, it'll send them back the scores and about a 17-page report about what those scores mean. You all should have access to that Pearson report. I see that the doctors are trying to hide those reports and not release them, which is not reasonable to me. I think they can be subpoenaed, or you should just ask the doctor send us that Pearson report, because what I'm finding is the doctors are copying and pasting what's in that Pearson report into their own report. And that's a violation of the labor code. The doctor's supposed to write their own report and interpret, do all the work themselves. But if they're paying an outside service and then they're copying and pasting, saying, I wrote this report, they didn't write the whole report. Somebody else wrote a portion of it, right? So attorneys should be calling them on that, because that's also a big no-no. And I'm happy to answer more questions if you all want to contact me about the MMPI, if you have those specific questions at a later time. I do want to leave time for questions. So before I get to the last slide, let me direct your attention to the screen. These are other topics that I have presentations on and I love talking about, that are more honed in on specific areas of psychology and psychiatry. If you all are ever interested for your company or your firm, please contact me. I'm happy to do it. And I will be speaking at MacroPro and Friends again in San Diego and later in the fall on one of these topics. I hope you attend and participate in that. And I'm an
And
open
doctor,
book.
we could certainly have you back. We can certainly have you back on a webinar here at MacroPro University if their companies don't bring people in, because we find more and more that people are
Yeah,
not in the office.
I
So
find
if we can assist that way, if you guys want to put in, can you go back to that list that you had, doctor? If you want to put in what topic you would like to see in the next webinar with Doctor, we can certainly arrange for that. So, okay, Doctor, we have some questions here. So the first one would be, they want to know if social media checks are helpful at all for doctors, finding addresses, etc.
they could be, they're very similar to what I commented about surveillance, is that social media is really what the individual, the human, wants to put out to the world about themselves. And social media, usually people want to put out the best parts of themselves and to make it seem that they're living a happy, fulfilled life. And so we'll get a glimpse into that. And it could be helpful, but it's not the full picture.
Got it. So what is your professional opinion on what types of things that, what type of restrictions an employee should have with a psych claim? Because they do see a lot of TTDs and time off, but they don't seem to be getting better, which I'm sure a lot of people will echo that.
Yeah. It's so individualized to the injury and the claim and even the person's personality. I guess I'll give just one example that I've seen recently. Personnel issues, disagreements with superiors in the workplace. And so the doctor gave a restriction of they can't be around their supervisor. They can't work under that supervisor. Is that reasonable for the employer? Do they have more than one supervisor? Nobody knows. The doctor especially doesn't know. So what the doctor should be doing, I think, in my opinion, is recommending that their treating psych doctor provide tips and therapy or recommendations for themselves on getting their spirits or their mood to improve, so that they are able to successfully work with others and under supervision of others. And if not, then perhaps the workplace is not the best place for them at the moment, because how are they going to get better if they have to be in the same space as the person that's giving them distress?
Makes sense. So someone wants to know, is a lie detector at all good, and can it be used?
I would stay away from the lie detectors. They can be skewed, and my understanding is they could be argued in court. What I think is a better alternative is the psychological testing. The two tests are MMPI and MCMI, Milan Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory. And if those are both given and the results both show that the person is not being honest and truthful or is attempting to distort their true clinical presentation, then those tests, because they're so well researched and widely researched for decades, are likely to hold up, especially if they're signed off by a psychologist or psychiatrist.
All right. When we see in a report most days, is that sufficient as far as their moods are concerned when the doctor puts in most days?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think the doctors do that because they know what the DSM says. And so the big question should be, doctor, did you ask them, the injured worker, how often they experience depression? And if so, what was their response? Because it's not likely that a person said most days and the doctor just left it at that. The doctor should be asking, you know, how many days out of a month would you say, give or take, you experience depression? There should be a number.
Yeah, and people who are depressed do know that. Now,
Yes,
having had depression in my family with my son, he knew how he still knows he's not depressed like he used to be, but he's able to say, yeah, I experienced that, 4 times a month on average.
right.
Okay, so let's ask this. Why do the reports vary so much? All these different reports that they get. Why do the doctor's reports vary so much?
Um, well, I think there are a few different answers. One, every psych doctor is trained in a different way. What I find are psychiatrists are more inclined to treat because they have other jobs. They work in hospitals, they have bedside or chairside manner. They have patients that they're treating to get better. In work comp, as an evaluator, their job is different. They're there to evaluate only and not treat. But it's very difficult for the doctor to transition and separate the two. So a treating doctor by nature, when they are now asked to evaluate a patient, they're more inclined to have that sensitivity to say, oh, I see everything that's wrong with you. Let me write it up and say you have all these disorders and it's all due to work so you can get the treatment. On the flip side, we have doctors that are professors and researchers, and then they do evaluations. They don't treat so much. They might be more inclined to say, oh, I don't see it. You're not so much depressed. I'm not going to give you the disorder. Or I'm going to say you have, so much apportion to non-industrial factors, right? So it varies there. Um, Even worse, I see that a lot of psych doctors who are evaluators in work comp, they hire assistants to do most of their work. And the assistants are not trained in mental health. So they help evaluate, they take the intakes, they administer the psych testing, they score the psych testing, and they write or ghostwrite much of the report. And so I think for that reason, a lot of the psych doctors will vary in their reporting.
Interesting. Earlier in the conversation, you were talking about being able to not being able to pair certain things together. Can you tell us why you can't pair things together?
When Remind me, what was I saying that about? Pair things together?
It's not specific in the question, and maybe it's the difference between combining and adding when it comes to a rating.
Um, I'm not clear on the question either, but I'll just add that if a rating, like a GAF score, is lower, um, we may not be able to. How does a doctor arrive at that score? They may they should be relying on the history, the mental status exam, and the testing, and all the information they obtain from those areas to determine the level of impairment or the appropriate GAF score that the person has at the time. But they shouldn't be necessarily just relying only on one of those specific areas. A lot of psych doctors will say, "Well, they told me that this was bothering them and that was bothering them, and they were having troubles here. That's why I gave them a GAF score." But that's just one area, so they should be taking the whole picture.
Right. All right. Well, that seems to be all the questions. Somebody did say how much they loved today's presentation. So thank you for that. And the
Okay.
other thing I think is fascinating is we put up the list. We asked people, what would you like to see? And we only got one duplication. Everybody else picked something different, which I think is very interesting.
Ah,
Someone else also asked about handouts. So Dr. Ron's information is there. Doctor, do you have your email? Yep, doctor's email is there. So if you want a copy of today's handout, please reach out to Doctor at Dr. Heredia at goodmoodlegal.com, and he can get you a copy of those. And Doctor, that'd be good for you because then you'll know who wants that information.
Sure.
Doctor's always been an outstanding speaker and a great part of our community. We want to thank you so much, Doctor, for participating with us today in our it's probably the fifth of our webinars for the summer school series. We still have another one on Friday that is coming up, and that's going to be on advanced orthopedic interventions. So that's going to be a very good one as well. So go to the Macro Pro website. You can look at all of the different topics that we have available to you and sign up for them there. Until the next time, we want to thank you all, and we'll see you at the Macro Pro University webinars again later this week. Bye-bye now.